Hello, everyone, and welcome to Archeo Viking. Today is going to be the first in a 7 video series on some of the most complex large-scale civilizations that arose, and interesting as well, large-scale civilizations that arose in the history of Africa. Now, obviously, there are a lot more than just 7 complex civilizations that arose in Africa, but being that there are a lot more than 7, I can only reasonably cover so many in a series. So, with that in mind, the first video in the series that we're going to talk about is the history of the Kerma civilization and the Kingdom of Kush. Um, Two kingdoms that are oftentimes known as the quote unquote so-called Black Kings of the Nile. So I'm sure right off the bat, everyone watching this video is very familiar with the Nile. It is uh, oftentimes called the world's longest river. I don't know if that's necessarily completely true, but oftentimes called the world's longest river. And it's a river that runs roughly from Uganda all the way up through Egypt. And of course, if you are aware of the Nile, you're probably aware of the Nile's connection to the ancient Egyptian civilization. However, uh, Egypt was not the only civilization that was connected to or affected by the Nile. In fact, there is another civilization that was, for much of its history, a rival to ancient Egypt that also had a connection to the Nile. And that is a very nebulous region, geographic region, that's was located in now, well, could also be argued still located now in the modern day countries of Sudan and also the lower part of modern day Egypt. And that geographic region is called Nubia. So before we get into the bulk of this video about the civilizations of Nubia, Kerma, and the Kingdom of Kush, we first need to go back a little bit further in time to look at uh, Sudan and the southern part of Egypt before these civilizations arose. So with that, we're coming to our first section of our video, Mesolithic and Neolithic Sudan, which ran roughly from 9,000 to 2400 BCE. So right off the bat, starting around 13,000 years ago to around 10,000 years ago, give or take, several different language groups began to migrate into Africa, branching off from the so-called Semitic languages, eventually becoming Egyptian, Berber, Proto-Afro-Asiatic, Cushitic, Omotic, and Chadic, with Egyptian Proto-Afro-Asiatic and Cushitic being the languages, all 3 of these languages being centered around the area of Nubia. And it was also during the Mesolithic and Neolithic of Sudan and southern Egypt that we begin to see several cultural groups begin to arise. Those groups being the so-called A group, the Butana group, and eventually a little bit later, the so-called C group, the Kerma culture, and the Medjai, with the Kerma culture and the Medjai being groups we will talk about just a little bit later in the video. And during this time, several large settlements began to pop up all over the region of southern Egypt and Sudan, which you can see in this map as well as in this one, where you can see sort of the distribution of them towards the end of the Neolithic here, around 5,000 BCE, give or take. as well as in this map here, where you can see the plan of several different Mesolithic. I almost mixed them up with megalithic. Mesolithic settlement designs and structures. And here are some more pictures showing Mesolithic and and early Neolithic and late Neolithic habitation structures that were often built with limited stone use, as you can see here in this picture and this picture here. And it's also especially during the Neolithic of Sudan, that we begin to see the animal domestication arise. This included animals like domestic cattle, sheep and goat, as well as the utilization of wild fauna as well. But obviously, as you can see in these graphs, right about 4700 BCE, give or take, between 4700 and 4300 BCE, you begin to see animal domestication far outweigh the exploitation of wild animals, such as, say, antelope and things like that. And actually, it did not. Animal domestication did not arise in Neolithic Sudan, or quote unquote Nubia. In fact, as you can see in this graph, it seems to have arisen in the region, not specifically animal domestication arisen in Africa, but animal domestication seems to have arisen in this little region first in Egypt, before spreading south to Nubia, and then eventually into central Sudan. So to clarify, Nubia is northern Sudan, and then this is central Sudan. And of course, we also begin to see the creation and utilization of pottery in the Mesolithic and Neolithic, which came in various different typologies, or for those of you who don't know what typology is, shape and size and design. Now we move on to our next section, the pre-Kerma period, which lasted from roughly 3500 to 2400 BCE, and is really a subset of the Neolithic period of Sudan, but also has some unique characteristics that that require its own section in this video. So here's a little graph explaining the a little figure table explaining sort of the division of these different time periods here. And as you can see here, the pre-Kerma period is where we begin to see the classical and then terminal A group show up. And during the pre-Kerma period, this is where we also begin to see the first construction of fortified villages and towns, as seen in this picture here, in this reconstruction of a pre-Kerma village town with walls and fortified structures. And then here is the actual area that was excavated by archaeologists. And here is another picture of the general plan of one of these fortified villages. All right, so now that we've gotten the Mesolithic and Neolithic, as well as the pre-Kerma period of northern Sudan and southern Egypt out of the way, now it is time to get into the meat of the video, starting with the Kerma culture, or the Kerma kingdom, which lasted from roughly 2400 to 1500 BCE. So again, here is that table showing when the Kerma period begins, and showing the other sort of like subdivisions and such. So the Kerma civilization, or the Kerma kingdom, gets its name for the the city, or the city or large scale village dating to around 2400 BCE to 1500 BCE, called Kerma. That's where, as I said, that's where it gets its name. And it seems to have been the capital of this culture or kingdom that was centered around the upper Nubia part of Sudan. And here is the city of Kerma here. And the Kerma culture also is seen in this map here, in this graph here, seems to be very much related genetically and ancestrally from a group that arose just slightly north of Kerma and perhaps coexisted with the Kerma culture at the same time, called the C group, which you can see here. And again, you can see in these graphs that the inhabitants of Kerma and the so-called C group are very much very closely related to varying degrees. And as I implied a little earlier, Kerma is one could argue, depending on the time period you're looking at Kerma, whether it's a large-scale village or a city, but either way, it is a very large settlement that is, as you can see here, is characterized by a very large population density based off of the buildings, as well as characterized by very or substantial enough defensive walls. And here is a picture of Kerma here. And here is a picture of the ceremonial palace, because of course, and as many of you expect, there were some form of royalty that did rule the Kerma civilization. Whether they called themselves kings or chief or what have you, we don't know, but based off of the existence of some form of palace, we do know that there was some sort of authoritative hierarchical structure in place for the kingdom of Kerma and the city of Kerma. The Kerma culture is characterized by a lot of different artifacts and building practices that have been found. One of the most well-known being the large number of tumulus burial mounds found within the area of influence of the Kerma culture, as you can see here. Oftentimes, these burial mounds would have, as you can see in the description, hundreds of cattle skulls that would line these tumulus mounds. Of course, some would probably have less, but it's very apparent that the placing of cattle skulls and cattle remains was very closely connected with some form of royal or high status elite burial practice in the Kerma necropolis, or the Kerma burial cemetery, Valley of the Kings, whatever you want to call it. The Kerma culture also had a wide range of very intricate art, as seen here, where you begin to see the sort of predecessors to religious iconography of the later kingdoms of Kush, such as the ram and the lion, which first appear in the Kerma period, with the rams being thought to be the precursors of the state god of the later kingdom of Kush, the ram-headed deity known as Amun of Napata. And then the large faience, or faience is a sort of glass ceramic type structure. The large faience inlay of the lion you see here, taking up a prominent position on the eastern Defufa temple funerary monument in one of Kerma's eastern cemeteries. Also found within the archaeological record of the Kingdom of Kerma are a variety of very intricate trade goods, such as these beads you see here, of varying different colors, with some being made of turquoise, some of copper, and various other different precious stones. And this is another example here, and some, of course, being made of glass. Like I said, some being made of copper, also bronze and gold. Um, just a wide variety of different types of jewelry has been found within the burial mounds and the habitation areas of the Kingdom of Kerma, suggesting that this kingdom, or this culture, polity, whatever you want to call it, was quite wealthy. We also the archaeologists have also found within the tombs various different uh, examples of giraffes and elephants made from ivory and mica, and things like that, that were embedded in the sides and headboards of wooden funeral beds. So perhaps these figures had some spiritual or ceremonial meaning, or perhaps they were just decorative, or maybe the elephants and the giraffes were symbols of status or something. But we're not exactly sure, of course, unless you're an Egyptologist or something and you have an answer for me for that. And if so, please feel free to leave a comment for us in the comment section. But either way, these things have been found in funeral beds, and therefore do have some form of significance in regards to high status individuals from the Kingdom of Kerma. The Kingdom of Kerma is also well known for a variety of different kinds of pottery and ceramics, as you can see here, with the black and white one here on the top being made from the so-called C group of people, the C group people. And then you have the red brushwares of the Kerma style here in the middle and below. We also find various other items from things like burial goods from a child's grave, various faience necklaces, among other different types of beads and made out of shell and things like that. And then, of course, the Kerma, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, is well known for the construction of large temples, such as the Western Defufa Temple, located within the city of Kerma itself. The Kingdom of Kerma was also situated in a location where they could easily access and monopolize and utilize gold deposits. As you can see here on this map, these are all gold deposits, and the triangles are from assemblages. The triangle symbols are from assemblages associated with the Kerma culture, as you see here. And as you can see by the other symbols, these gold mines were utilized for quite a long time, even after the Kerma culture. So, now that we've examined the Kerma culture itself, you might be asking, well, considering where the Kerma culture was located, did they have any contacts with the ancient Egyptian civilization? Yeah, they did. They most certainly did. And that leads us to this section about the connections between Kerma and pharaonic Egypt. So, of course, we have to start in this when we come to the subject of the relationship between the Kingdom of Kerma and Nubia with the Old Kingdom of Egypt. We have to go back all the way to the beginning to the Old Kingdom of Egypt, the first fully unified Kingdom of Egypt. And this is the kingdom that is most well known for the construction of the 3 pyramids of Giza, among a whole other slew of pyramids, not just these 3. So, the first Egyptian mentions of the Kingdom of Kerma and the Nubians are mentioned during the reign of Pepi, and I may butcher this, so please forgive me for possibly butchering this, especially if you're an Egyptologist. Pepi Meri the First. Uh, so during his reign, uh, the Egyptian sources mentions a group of people, nomadic people known as the Magi in Lower Nubia. And this is Pepi Meri here, and this is a depiction of one of those Magi. And essentially, the descriptions describe the Magi as pastoralist nomads who are warriors and who oftentimes uh, are sometimes mercenaries for Egypt and are also oftentimes groups who raid Egypt. And then a little bit later, as we come into the Middle Kingdom, we begin to see large scale military expeditions into uh, Egypt, as well as large scale trade, not Egypt, into Nubia, as well as large scale trade with Nubia or the Kerma culture. So, to start, the founder of the Middle Kingdom, Menuhotep II, would lead military campaigns. Would launch military campaigns, which would be led under the command of his vizier Keti, and send them south into Nubia sometime during his reign between 260 to 200 and 2009 BCE. And during these expeditions, the Egyptian military would build a series of forts, as you can see here, bordering the Kerma culture. Essentially, border forts to protect Egypt, the Kingdom of Egypt, as well as to provide a sort of forward operating base to lead more expeditions into Nubia and the Kerma Kingdom or Kerma culture. But despite these military expeditions, there is also a lot of evidence for cultural exchange between Egypt and the Kerma culture. This can be seen in a variety of ways, such as the discovery by archaeologists of black granite statues of Egyptian style in Kerma, such as this one, which is a statue of Lady Sunui, the wife of a powerful provincial governor. We also find various Egyptian jewelry uh, in archaeological context connected to the Kerma culture, such as fragments of an Egyptian faience vessel depicting hippopotamus, and a faience bead belt with a glazed quartz pendant, both of which were discovered in Kerma's necropolis during the early excavations or early archaeological excavations. We also find very striking similarities with contemporary Egyptian art, as seen in the hippo and pottery shirt here, and which often makes identifying the origin of manufacture a contentious issue. And this is because ancient Egypt and Kush, or the Kingdom of Kerma, as it was called at this point in time, or as we call it, were each other's primary trading partners and enemies. And because of that, numerous artifacts from each culture regularly made their way into the other's grave sites. Either through peaceful exchange or violent raids, these artifacts still would end up in each other's cultural context, like in the houses of Egyptian people or the houses of people of the Kingdom of Kerma, or in their burials. So some pieces are very Egyptian-like, but it should also be noted that some pieces are also typically Sudanese or typically of the make and style of the Kerma culture and Nubia. Right around the what is called the Second Intermediate Period, roughly 1700 to 1550 BCE, Egypt would face a lot of strife and division because of the coming of a group of peoples known as the Hyksos, who would conquer much of, but not all, of Egypt, um, and would rule essentially all of northern Egypt, uh, often called Lower Egypt because it is the lower downstream part of the Nile, whereas Egypt would rule the Egyptian empire kingdom would rule Upper Egypt or the upstream part of the Nile. And the Hyksos, these people who would conquer northern Egypt, would be the ones who would bring uh, weapons and technology such as chariots, as you can see here. Um, and they would introduce weapons that would eventually be adopted and used by the Kingdom of Egypt itself. These things being things like the Kopesh sword, seen here, and various different types of cattle hide and wood shield, as you see here, and of course a whole litany of different styles of axe and dagger and swords that you see here. They would also be the ones who would introduce things like the composite bow, as seen here. Okay, so now that we have gotten the armaments of the Hyksos, as well as the Egyptians, and the armament of the Kingdom of Kerma, also known as the Nubians, out of the way, as well as the types of soldiers that they used, it is now time to take a look at our next section, the defeat of the Hyksos and the Egyptian reunification and establishment of the new Kingdom of Egypt. So, starting around somewhere between 1550 and 1500 BCE, the kings of Egypt, the rulers of Egypt, who had been, I don't want to necessarily been exiled, but they had been forced to withdraw further south into southern Egypt, also known as Upper Egypt. These kings who had been forced to withdraw to the southern region of Egypt began to launch several military campaigns into northern Egypt, or also known as Lower Egypt, that would eventually lead to the defeat of the Hyksos and the reunification of the Kingdom of Egypt. After this, one of the New Kingdom kings, Tutmos I, would launch military campaigns into the Kingdom of Kerma, into Nubia, and would eventually lead to the conquest of Kerma by Egypt, roughly in 1504 BCE. After this conquest of Nubia, of the Kingdom of Kerma, Tutmos I would build several forts in the region to police Nubia. And this was done because Nubia very quickly, one, of course, became another province of Egypt, which was also a very lucrative province of Egypt, connected to the Bronze Age trade networks, with Nubia specifically being connected to the export of things like gold and exotica, as well as staple foods like grain and animals, and would also oftentimes be used as a place of exile for Egyptian elites, essentially expatriate Egyptians to be sent to. So it was a very integral, important region, and very profitable region for the New Kingdom of Egypt. That being said, it was also one of the most contentious regions within the New Kingdom of Egypt, and that's because despite being under rule of the New Kingdom of Egypt, Nubia would rebel basically every chance they got. In fact, they rebelled so much that take a dart and throw it at the list of Egyptian kings in the New Kingdom, there's a chance that they might have had to lead a military campaign into Nubia to suppress rebellions. These pharaohs who had to lead military campaigns into Nubia in response to these periodic rebellions included, but are not limited to, Tutmosis the First and Tutmosis the Second and Third, Seti the First, and Ramesses the Second, all of whom at one point in time in their reign had to put down some form of rebellion or rebellions that had broken out in Nubia. But at the same time, these rebellions also showed the Egyptian rulers that the Nubian soldiers were, the people of Kerma, the Nubian soldiers were very skilled fighters. And so this led the Nubian soldiers to be used as auxiliaries in the New Kingdom Egyptian army. As seen in this picture here, where there is a Medjai Nubian soldier here, and as seen in these figures here. Also, eventually, the Medjai contingent of Nubia, who had started off as nomadic pastoralist warriors, would eventually evolve into Egypt's essentially go-to police force. And not only that, they would evolve from being solely Nubian or solely people from Sudan and will become a multi-ethnic police force where essentially if you're a skilled soldier, if you're the best of the best, you would become a member of the Medjai, as seen here in this depiction here, and as seen in this graph on the evolution of the meaning of the phrase Medjai. It should also be stated, though, that because of these rebellions, that I mentioned earlier, while Nubia would remain an Egyptian colony during the New Kingdom, Egypt would still lose control of much of the region around, specifically the Nangola Reach, seen here, specifically during the reign of Ramesses II. Which leads us to our next section, the decline of the New Kingdom of Egypt and the rise of the very powerful Kingdom of Kush. So the decline of the New Kingdom of Egypt really began with the death of Ramesses II's successor, Merneptah, who, after he died, had not picked out really a significant successor. I mean, he had, but it was not a successor who had a majority popularity or anything like that. And because of that, the various different sons of Merneptah would fight amongst each other over the throne, which of course would lead to a succession crisis and would lead to Egypt being divided up amongst the various different relatives of Merneptah, as you see in this map. Also, during this period of time, all Bronze Age civilizations in the Mediterranean would begin to decline and collapse to varying degrees. And this was because of a variety of different things: climatic change, disease, warfare, mass migrations, basically all of these events happening at once, famine, environmental disasters, all these things happening at once, they essentially would overload all of these civilizations, leaving until eventually the only two civilizations that were left standing in some form of cohesion and unity being the New Kingdom of Egypt and the Middle Assyrian Empire. And because of this, the New Kingdom of Egypt would completely lose control of Nubia, of Upper Sudan, which would eventually lead to the Kingdom of Kush being able to rise into power, with the Kingdom of Kush being centered around the city of Napata. And this would happen around roughly 1070 BCE, though, of course, as one can guess, it was probably already happening during the Bronze Age collapse as well. And then while all this is going on, while Egypt was becoming weakened from all of these different crises, invasions, etc., and while the Kingdom of Kush was rising to power and prominence, eventually Egypt would enter the so-called Third Intermediate Period and would become even more fractured than it already was during the succession crisis after the death of Merneptah. While Egypt was fracturing and in decline, the Kingdom of Kush was not only on the rise, but was also flourishing. This can be seen in a variety of different ways. First, with the various building projects of the first Napatan king, Alara, who would one dedicate his sister to the cult of Amun at the Temple of Kawa that he had rebuilt, as well as Alara would also rebuild the temples at Barkal and Kerma, all of which show that after 500 years of Egyptian occupation, the Kingdom of Kush was largely Egyptian in culture. We can also see this flourishing and this evidence of Egyptification of the Kingdom of Kush in things like this statue covered in hieroglyphs, which is the sitting statue of the divine adoratress of Amun, Amendaris the First, as well as these cartouches bearing the names of Kashta and Amendaris. As Kush was on the rise and flourishing, eventually the Kushite king Pai, and I apologize if I butchered that, would invade and conquer Egypt in 744 BCE, leading to the establishment of the 25th dynasty of Egypt. And during his reign, Pai would he would construct a victory stele commemorating his conquest of Egypt, and he would also construct a pyramid at El Kuru, and he would expand the Temple of Amun at Jebel Barkal. Eventually, Pai's successors, Shabbataka and Shabaka, would go on to increase the sphere of influence and contact of the 25th dynasty and the Kingdom of Kush by establishing ties with Sargon II of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Here is Shabbataka, here is Shabaka, and here is Sargon II. And here is a map of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And then here's pictures of the various rulers of the 25th dynasty in the Kingdom of Kush. After the establishment of these ties with after the creation of the 25th dynasty and the establishment of ties between the 25th dynasty of Egypt and the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the fourth king of the 25th dynasty, Taharqa, would launch several military campaigns into the Levant, or what is now modern-day Israel, Jordan, and Syria, and it would greatly expand Kushite territory. And because of these expansions, eventually several Israelite kingdoms and kings, such as Hezekiah of Judah, would form alliances with the Kingdom of Kush in the 25th dynasty against Neo-Assyria, as seen here. While all of this was happening, while he was making these military campaigns, Taharqa would also construct several monuments throughout Egypt and Nubia. In Memphis and Thebes, he rebuilt and restored the Temple of Amun. He is also known for various monuments at Karnak. He would also choose to uh, build his pyramid at the site of Nuri rather than at the traditional burial site of El Kuru that had been started by by Pharaoh Pai. And it was the first, his pyramid, Taharka's pyramid, was the first and largest pyramid of Nuri, and he would be followed by close to 20 later kings at this site. In response to the raids on Neo-Assyrian territory by the Egyptian-Israelite alliance, the Neo-Assyrian ruler Sennacherib would attack the rebels and conquer many Israelite cities, as well as he would also defeat the Egyptians and drive them from the regions. He would then march towards Jerusalem, destroying 46 towns and villages, including the heavily defended city of Lachish in his path, or Lachish. After the destruction of the city, the Assyrians would then deport the Israelite survivors to the Assyrian Empire to essentially put them in forced labor for Sennacherib's building projects. So now that we have looked at the beginning of military tensions between the Kingdom of Kush and the Neo-Assyrian Empire, it's now time for us to take a look at the general armaments and makeup of soldiers that these two sides had during this period in the 7th century BCE. So during the 7th century BCE, soldiers of the Kingdom of Kush generally looked something like this. Very sort of Egyptian looking, wielding cowhide shields and Egyptian sort of style armor, as you see here. But they also were still very much archers, as you see in this depiction here. In fact, they still used quite a lot of the various, essentially same weapons or very similar weapons as their predecessors in the Kingdom of Kerma, still using arrowheads and archery, as you see here in all of these pictures that we've already gone over. This was all in very similar to, and also at the same time in stark contrast to, the Neo-Assyrian warriors and their weapons. So the Neo-Assyrian soldiers generally looked something like you see in these depictions here. And they did have archers, much like the Kingdom of Kush, as you see in this depiction here, and they used a variety of different types of arrows and arrowheads like you see here, but they also used things like iron swords, as well as using spears. But of course the Kingdom of Kush soldiers also used spears. But what really made the Neo-Assyrian army stand out is that they were some of the earliest, not necessarily the earliest, but some of the earliest users of iron weapons, as seen here. They also were some of the earliest users of siege engines or siege weapons like siege towers, as seen in this carving here and in this depiction here, meaning that they could much more easily lay siege to fortifications and walls and things like that. Now, with all that in mind, it is time to move on to the main conflicts between the Neo-Assyrian Empire and the Kingdom of Kush. So, the Neo-Assyrian king Esarhaddon would invade Egypt in 673 BCE, only to be defeated by Taharka and his army. However, despite this defeat, Esarhaddon would invade a second time in 671 BCE and would be successful, leading to the sack of Memphis, the city of Memphis in Egypt. Following Esarhaddon's successes, His successor, Ashurbanipal, would invade Egypt twice. Uh, he would first invade Egypt in 667 BCE, where he would defeat Taharka, who would flee to Thebes. Ashurbanipal would then march the Assyrian army as far south as Thebes, sacking numerous revolting cities. He would then leave and then invade a second time in 663 BCE, where he would again successfully sack several cities on his way to Thebes, and then would eventually sack Thebes itself. After these invasions by Ashurbanipal, the kingdom of Kush would be pushed out of Egypt, and Egypt would officially be absorbed into the Assyrian Empire. However, despite this, the kingdom of Kush would live on and would survive, with its capital essentially becoming Napata again. However, despite Assyria conquering Egypt, eventually Assyria would be conquered first by Babylon and the Median Empire in 609 BCE, and then Babylon in the Median Empire itself would be conquered by the Achaemenid Persian Empire, with the Achaemenid Persian Empire eventually conquering Egypt itself. This brings us to our next section, the Meroitic period of the Kingdom of Kush, which began somewhere between 591 and 542 BCE and would last till around 350 CE. And this period would first begin with some minor setbacks for the Kingdom of Kush, as the pre-Achaemenid Egyptian pharaoh, Egyptian ruler, Psamtik II, would successfully invade Kush and sack the city of Napata in 1591 BCE. That would eventually lead the kings of Kush, the rulers of Kush, to move the seat of government in the royal palace from Napata to the city of Meroe. Though it should also be noted that after this move, the kings of Kush would continue to rule over both the cities of Napata and Meroe as their seats of power. After this setback, eventually the Achaemenid Persian Empire would successfully conquer Egypt, and after the successful conquest of Egypt by the Achaemenid Persian Empire, the second Achaemenid ruler, Cambyses II, would launch an invasion into the Kingdom of Kush that would be very unsuccessful in 530 BCE. And we still don't know really a lot about what happened. The records seem to indicate the soldiers were defeated somewhere in the desert, but whether or not that was due to the desert heat or due to actual military defeat is unknown. But either way, regardless of whichever was the cause, the invasion was unsuccessful. And this would lead to the Kingdom of Kush being in a golden age. First, despite the movement of the seat of government from the Napata to Meroe, the main temple of Ammon, the state deity of the Kingdom of Kush, would remain in Napata. And it should also be noted that the kings of Kush seem to have chosen the city of Meroe because it was on the fringe of a geographic area known as the Summer Rainfall Belt, and because the area was also rich in iron ore and hardwood for ironworking, as evidenced by excavations of a furnace workshop, several forges, and slag heaps at the city of Meroe itself. True to form, because both the kings of Kush ruled both Napata and Meroe as their seats of power, during the Meroitic period, kings and queens with varying degrees of frequency would be buried both at the original royal cemetery of Nuri in Napata, as well as in the West Cemetery in Meroe. Okay, so now it is time to take a look at the golden age of the Kingdom of Kush itself, meaning we need to take a look at the culture, architecture, medicine, and economy of the Kingdom of Kush. Starting with the uh, starting with trade in the Kingdom of Kush during the Meroitic and the Hellenistic period, which is a time period that lasted roughly from 323 to 232 BCE. And the Hellenistic period was a time period dominated by Greek empires, such as the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom, the Seleucid Empire, as well as the Kingdom of Macedon, and the most famous of all of them, the Ptolemaic Empire. And with the establishment of this Hellenistic world and the establishment of the Ptolemaic Kingdom, too came the establishment of or the reestablishment of intricate trade networks in the Red Sea, the Erythraean Sea, the Erythraean Sea, and the Indian Ocean, with the Kingdom of Kush and Meroe being very key players, being essentially, as you can see on this map, major trade cities connected to this trade network. You can also see this here on this map. With Kushite trade goods being things like gold, jewelry, and textiles. Now we're going to take a look at Kushite technology during the Meroitic period. So the Kushites were unsurprisingly very advanced. They developed things like water filtration devices, as well as reservoirs. They also developed blast furnaces, among other things. One of the other, one could argue, should technically be part of the technology, but is also in its own section, sign of how advanced the Kingdom of Kush was the type of medicine used by the Kingdom of Kush during the Meroitic period. And what I mean by that is the Kushites would produce beer as a form of early antibiotics. Now, you might be asking, Dane, how is beer an antibiotic? Well, beer, especially Kushite and Egyptian beer, was found after testing the enzymes and such within the beer to be high in tetraglycine, which is an antibiotic that works by stopping the growth of bacteria. And they found high levels of it in the bone density in cemeteries in the Kingdom of Kush, as well as within Ptolemaic Egypt, as you can see here. Now, it should be noted that the Kingdom of Kush, the Kushites were most certainly not aware of tetraglycine in the beer. No one in the ancient world, whether it be in the Americas, in Rome, in Egypt, in China, etc., had any concept of what the hell bacteria or antibiotics were. But the Kushites most certainly probably noticed how one was sick less frequently if they drank more beer at the time. So it makes sense for them to brew beer as an antibiotic, because it was like, oh, Tutmos, he's not, it's, he doesn't get as sick as often as Pai over here, etc., etc. So that's why they would make the beer. Now we're going to take a look at Kushite architecture during the Meroitic period. So the architecture of the Kushite period includes, but is not limited to, things like the epidemic temple at Naka, as well as this the temple complex at Musawarat es Sufra that you see here. The Kingdom of Kush, the Meroitic Kingdom of Kush, is also known for the creation of the so-called Nubian vault that you see here, which is a construction technique for stabilizing roofs and things like that. And then we move on to the next section, the Kushite mathematics during the Meroitic period, where we see that the Kingdom of Kush was able to establish a system of geometry very similar to the trigonomic methodology of ancient Egypt, which they would use in creating early versions of sun clocks, as seen in this academic paper here. Now we also need to take a look at Kushite religion during the Meroitic period, which was a mix of worship of native Kushite deities, such as Apidimak, you can see as you see here, and of course Egyptian deities such as Amun, as you see here, both of whom were very important. And the Kingdom of Kush during the Meroitic period also established its own language known as Meroitic, as you can see in these inscriptions here. All right, so now that we've taken a look at the Kingdom of Kush during its golden age, we now move on to our next big section, which is Kushite conflicts with Rome, which lasted roughly from 27 BCE to 61 CE. So, right around 30 BCE, the Roman Empire would conquer Egypt, which of course would bring the Roman Empire, which before then had not bordered the Kingdom of Kush, eventually led to the Kingdom of Kush now bordering the very powerful and obviously very expansionist Roman Empire. So eventually, in response to this growing power that was Rome, the Kingdom of Kush, led by Queen Amerinus. Apologies for possibly butchering that. Amerinus would invade Egypt and successfully burn several Roman garrisons in 27 BCE. And this is a depictions of the victory temple that the mosaic that she painted in honor of her victory in burning these Roman garrisons, showing a individual who has a stylized variation of a Roman armor and things like that is thought to have been a Roman legionary. Now, before we get into the main bulk of these conflicts that were essentially between Rome and the Kingdom of Kush, that were essentially ignited by the Kingdom of Kush itself and Amerinus herself, we need to look at the what the soldiers of both the Kingdom of Kush and Rome looked at this point in time, as well as their weapons. So during this period of time, the beginning of what essentially was the first century CE or AD, soldiers of the Kingdom of Kush generally looked something like this you see here, and this here. And they were generally equipped with swords that looked something like this. Of course, they were still equipped with the traditional Nubian hand bow. They were still known for being very adept archers, as seen by these arrowheads that we've seen a couple of times in the video, but are now front and center because they are specifically from the Meroitic period. They also used various different types of knives and daggers of this style here, and they, of course, used spears. Meanwhile, Roman soldiers during this period of time looked generally something like this, but they also had some evolved to varying degrees throughout the period, with soldiers in between 55 BCE and 15 CE, or 55 BC and 15 AD, looking something like these two that you see here, and then eventually by 100 AD, looking sort of like the Roman legionaries that everyone is familiar with. And they were armed with also a very diverse armament. Roman soldiers generally used composite bows or recurve bows. They were armed with various different types of swords, such as the gladius, the prototypical Roman sword that everyone's familiar with. But they were also armed with longer swords, such as the spatha. They use a variety of different kinds of types of arrows and arrowhead that you see here. Their projectile weapon of choice was generally the this type of javelin that you see here. And of course, everyone knows the scutum, or the Roman shield that they would use, and they of course also used a variety of different kinds of siege weapon, as seen here in this ballista, or oftentimes called a scorpion by the Roman army. So now that we've gotten their armaments, arms and armaments, and their makeup of their soldiers out of the way, let's take a look at the bulk of the conflicts between the Kingdom of Kush and the Roman Empire. So, in response to the attack on the Roman Empire by Amanirenas in 27 BCE, the Romans would invade Kush and sack the city of Napata in 24 BCE. However, in response to this, essentially, let's put it this way, essentially the Roman invasion backfired, because in response to the sacking, Amanirenas would gather a massive military force and would from the south, and would march north towards the Roman troops, who apparently were not aware that there were a lot of different Kushite forts in the area, so they were essentially surrounded and outnumbered. So the Roman army had withdrawn north to the border and set up camp at a fortified hilltop city called Proceedings. And then eventually Amanirenas would, with her large force, would come to this fortification and would completely encircle the Romans. However, they would reach a stalemate because while Amanirenas and her forces completely outnumbered the Romans, they would not be able to make a frontal assault on the city, as the Romans had a large array of ballistae, or scorpions, as they were often called by the Roman Empire, along the walls, which would make such a frontal assault impossible. So essentially, because of the stalemate, eventually the Roman Emperor Augustus himself would have to negotiate a peace treaty in the conflict. And this is all described in Strabo's geography book 17, chapter 54. Eventually, Rome would come back, though not as an invasion. Emperor Nero in 61 CE would send a party of his Praetorian Guard under the command of a tribune and 2 centurions into the Kingdom of Kush, where they would reach the city of Meroe, and they would actually be given an escort, and they would proceed up to the White Nile until they would encounter a series of swamps known as the Swamps of Sud, which would mark the limit of Roman penetration into Africa. After this, and after the cessation of conflicts between the Kingdom of Kush and Rome, the Kingdom of Kush would become key participants in the Indo-Roman trade network, often trading ivory among the other goods that they had traded in the preceding Hellenic era. And this is a map of sort of that Indo-Roman trade network here. So now that we have looked at the Meroitic period and its golden age, as well as the conflicts between the Kingdom of Kush and Rome, which led to the successful, essentially, stalemate between the Kingdom of Kush and Rome, i.e., the Kingdom of Kush was able to successfully fight toe-to-toe with the Roman Empire. Now we need to look at the decline and fall of the Kingdom of Kush, which happened roughly between 100 and 350 CE. So, starting off, uh, as the Kingdom of Kush began to weaken, groups of people who were once uh, lower, non-elite people, groups who had been under the influence of the Kingdom of Kush, known as the Blimi people, would begin to increase in power and would establish an independent kingdom, uh, which would lead to them successfully conquering parts of Lower Nubia. And then they would eventually begin to regularly raid both Kush and Rome in the 3rd century CE, roughly 200 to 300 CE or AD. At the same time, around 297 CE, the Noba or the Nobate, formerly a semi-nomadic tribe native to the western desert of Sudan, the western part of the Saharan Desert, uh, they are invited by the Roman Emperor Diocletian to establish themselves as Roman federati, or essentially Roman auxiliary troops, in Lower Nubia, in hopes to counter the threat of the Blimi people. These Noba, a former Kushite vassal, much like the Blimi, possibly even successful, are it is assumed that they possibly even established themselves as sort of like a military aristocracy in the Kingdom of Kush before the fall of the kingdom itself. The aggression of the Nobate, becomes an increasing liability to the Kingdom of Kush, further eroding the central authority of the Meroitic Kingdom of Kush. But the biggest nail in the coffin for the Kingdom of Kush, despite the continued raids by the Blemis, despite being weakened by warfare with Rome, despite their central authority being eroded by the Nobate, by the Noba people, the biggest threat to the Kingdom of Kush comes from another powerful African kingdom, the Kingdom of Axum, who would arise as a powerful political and trade rival to the Kingdom of Kush in the time period between 100 and 330 CE. Eventually, the king of Axum, Emperor Azana, would wage a devastating war on the Kushites. Azana's campaign seems to have been directed primarily against the Noba, or the Nobate, in response to Kush's inability to deal with their raiding activities on the Sudanese Axum Ethiopian border. And in this invasion, Azana would lay waste to Noba and Kushite territory alike, resulting in the eventual sack of Meroe, which would effectively end Kushite hegemony in 350 CE. Azana would then commemorate his victory on a large multilingual stele known as the Azana Stone, written in Gez, the state language of the Kingdom of Axum, Greek, and Sabian, a Southwest Arabian language. And here is that stele right here. After this, after the defeat of the Kingdom of Kush by the Kingdom of Axum, Axum would rise as the dominant African power in the region. Meanwhile, the Kingdom of Kush would be split into several semi-independent kingdoms by about 400 CE. These would include the Blimis, the Noba or Nobatier, the Makuria, and the Alwa. All right, so that ends our first video in our series on large-scale African civilizations and history. We've seen the history of one of the oldest African civilizations, the Kingdom of Kush, which has a heritage going all the way back to the Old Kingdom of Egypt and further, and was a kingdom that was able to fight on relatively equal footing with the Egyptian Empire, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, the Persian Empire, and the Roman Empire. making it a truly powerful and influential civilization. So with that, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see me cover any of the things I mentioned in this video in greater detail later, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section, and feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And I hope you all have a good day.